Have you ever given someone your entire heart, only to watch them crush it without a second thought? Have you ever loved so deeply, so purely, that you became a safe harbor for someone's chaos, only to be abandoned the moment the storm passed? If you're someone who feels everything, who absorbs the pain of others like your own, and you've been treated with cruelty despite offering nothing but compassion, Carl Jung discovered something that will fundamentally change how you see what happened to you. This isn't about you being too sensitive. This isn't about you loving too much or caring too deeply. This is about a psychological pattern so profound that once you understand it, you'll never see human cruelty the same way again. Jung spent decades studying what he called the empath's paradox, and what he found was both devastating and liberating. The very qualities that make you capable of profound love, the qualities that allow you to see into people's souls and hold space for their darkness, are the exact same qualities that certain people will exploit, punish, and ultimately destroy if you don't understand the hidden psychology behind it. You've probably asked yourself 1,000 times, what did I do wrong? Why wasn't my love enough? Am I fundamentally unlovable? And here's what Jung would tell you. Those questions have been keeping you trapped in a cycle of self-blame that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with a mechanism buried so deep in the human psyche that most people will never become conscious of it. The person who treated you so badly wasn't responding to who you actually are. They were responding to something they saw reflected in your empathic nature, something that triggered their deepest wounds, their most denied shadows, their most carefully hidden shame. Jung discovered that empaths don't just love people. They become mirrors for people's unlived lives, their suppressed emotions, their rejected selves. And when someone looks into that mirror and sees everything they've been running from, they don't thank you for the reflection. They shatter the mirror. They punish you for making them feel what they've spent their entire lives trying not to feel. But here's where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. And this is what you need to hear right now, wherever you are in your healing. The mistreatment wasn't random. It wasn't because you were too much or not enough. It was because your empathic system was unconsciously drawn to someone whose wounds perfectly matched the frequency of your own unhealed places. You weren't just loving them. You were trying to heal something in yourself by healing them. You were trying to prove that unconditional love could transform someone, because deep down, you've been waiting your entire life for someone to love you that way, to see past your wounds, your flaws, your humanity, and choose you anyway. Jung called this the wounded healer archetype. And if you're an empath who's been treated cruelly despite offering pure love, you're carrying this archetype, whether you know it or not. You have the capacity to hold space for people's darkness because you've learned to hold your own. You can love people through their worst moments because you understand what it's like to be in those moments yourself. But here's the shadow side that no one tells you about. In your attempt to be the healer, you've been unconsciously choosing people who can't be healed, at least not by you. Because what you're really trying to heal is the part of yourself that believes love has to be earned through suffering. Stay with me, because what comes next will show you exactly why this pattern has been repeating in your life, and more importantly, how to break it permanently. The answer lies in understanding something Jung discovered about empaths that will shatter everything you thought you knew about why people treat you the way they do. If you've ever felt this, if you've loved as an empath and been broken by someone's cruelty, despite giving them everything, share in the comments what that experience taught you about yourself. Sometimes naming the wound is the first step toward healing it. Jung made a discovery that will completely change how you understand why you were drawn to someone who would ultimately treat you so badly. He found that empaths possess what he called permeable soul boundaries, a psychological configuration that allows you to feel not just your own emotions, but the emotions of everyone around you. This isn't a flaw in your design. This is an evolutionary gift that marks you as someone whose consciousness operates at frequencies most people will never access. You don't just hear what people say, you feel what they're afraid to feel. You sense what they're hiding from themselves. You see the soul beneath the performance. But here's where the psychology becomes complex. Jung discovered that this gift becomes a curse when you encounter what he termed shadow carriers, individuals who embody the exact qualities you've repressed within yourself. Think about the person who treated you so badly. What quality did they possess that you found magnetic? Was it their confidence when you felt uncertain about your own worth? Their emotional unavailability when you've spent your life being too available? Their capacity for cruelty when you've suppressed your own healthy anger? their selfishness when you've denied your own legitimate needs. Jung would tell you that the attraction wasn't random. Your unconscious mind recognized in them something you'd been unconsciously suppressing in yourself. Empaths, he found, often grow up in environments where they learn to prioritize everyone else's emotional needs over their own. Perhaps you had a parent who was emotionally volatile, and you became the family thermostat, constantly monitoring and regulating everyone's feelings to keep the peace. Perhaps you learned that your needs were burdensome, that your emotions were too much, that your very existence required you to make yourself smaller so others could be comfortable. This early conditioning created your empathic superpowers, your ability to read rooms, sense shifts in emotional temperature, hold space for other people's pain. But it also created a shadow, the part of you that learned to betray yourself to maintain connection with others. And here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The person who treated you badly was unconsciously chosen by your psyche to show you exactly where you've been abandoning yourself. They mistreated you the same way you've been mistreating yourself, dismissing your needs, invalidating your feelings, making you feel like your love is worthless. Jung called this shadow magnetism, and it operates completely outside of conscious awareness. You think you're choosing someone because they're attractive, interesting, or different from your past partners, but your unconscious mind is running a different program entirely. It's seeking out someone who will recreate your original wound so that this time, maybe this time, you can finally get it right. You can finally prove that if you just love hard enough, feel deep enough, understand completely enough, they'll transform. They'll see your worth. They'll choose you. They'll stay. But the devastating truth Jung uncovered is this: you can't heal your childhood wounds by choosing people who remind you of what wounded you in the first place. You can't prove your lovability by loving people who are incapable of receiving love. You can't earn the validation you deserved as a child by performing emotional labor for adults who refuse to do their own healing work. The person who treated you badly wasn't your soulmate. They were your teacher, and the lesson was brutal but necessary. Stop abandoning yourself to maintain connection with people who don't value what you offer. And if you're feeling right now that maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop running from this truth, I want you to know that you're not alone in this journey. There's a path forward, and it begins with understanding the deeper patterns at play. Jung discovered something about human cruelty that most therapists never address. He found that when someone treats an empath with inexplicable harshness, they're not responding to what the empath is doing. They're responding to what the empath is reflecting back to them about themselves. Your empathic presence serves as a psychological mirror, and when certain people look into that mirror, they see everything they've been desperately trying to hide. Their vulnerability, their need for love, their deep-seated shame, their fear of being truly seen. Think about the specific ways this person mistreated you. Did they criticize your sensitivity, calling you too emotional or too intense? Jung would say they were projecting their own denied sensitivity onto you, punishing you for having the courage to feel what they've spent their entire lives suppressing. Did they accuse you of being needy when you simply asked for basic reciprocity? They were projecting their own unacknowledged needs, attacking you for wanting what they're terrified to want themselves. Did they ghost you after moments of profound intimacy? They were running from the reflection of their own capacity for connection, something they've convinced themselves they don't deserve. Jung called this shadow projection, and it's one of the most destructive forces in human relationships. The shadow is everything we've rejected about ourselves, all the qualities we've deemed unacceptable, shameful, or weak. For most people, the shadow remains completely unconscious. They have no idea they're carrying these rejected parts of themselves. But empaths, Jung found, have an uncanny ability to activate other people's shadows simply by existing in their authentic emotional truth. When you showed this person unconditional acceptance, you triggered their shame about the conditions they've always felt they had to meet to be worthy of love. When you offered them emotional depth, you triggered their fear of the vulnerability that depth requires. When you gave them your full presence, you triggered their terror of being truly seen, because being seen means being known, and being known means risking rejection by someone who actually matters. Your love wasn't too much. Your love was exactly enough to show them everything they've been avoiding in themselves, and they couldn't tolerate it. But here's where Jung's insight becomes profound, and this is what empaths need to understand to break free from this pattern. The cruelty you experienced had almost nothing to do with you and everything to do with their relationship with themselves. Jung stated that we don't see people as they are, We see them through the lens of our own unhealed wounds, our own denied shadows, our own unconscious projections. The person who treated you badly wasn't seeing you at all. They were seeing a distorted version of you filtered through their shame, their fear, their self-hatred. You became a screen onto which they projected their worst judgments about themselves. When they called you weak for crying, they were expressing their own shame about their tears. When they mocked your depth, they were defending against their own longing for meaning. When they punished your vulnerability, they were punishing the vulnerable child within themselves that they've spent decades trying to bury. Jung discovered that the intensity of someone's cruelty is directly proportional to the intensity of what they're denying in themselves. The more viciously they attacked you, the more desperately they're running from their own shadow. This understanding doesn't excuse their behavior, but it liberates you from the prison of believing their treatment reflected your value. You weren't treated badly because you're unlovable. You were treated badly because your love confronted them with everything they can't love about themselves. Your empathy reminded them of the empathy they've abandoned. Your authenticity exposed their performance. Your courage to feel triggered their terror of feeling. The mirror didn't lie. They just couldn't bear to look at what it reflected. Jung made a discovery that will be difficult to hear, but it's essential for your liberation. He found that empaths don't just randomly encounter people who mistreat them. They're unconsciously programmed to seek them out. Not because empaths enjoy suffering, but because their early childhood experiences created what Jung called a repetition compulsion, an unconscious drive to recreate the original wound in hopes of finally healing it. If you grew up with emotionally unavailable parents, your unconscious mind registered that as, this is what love feels like. And as an adult, emotional unavailability feels like home, even though your conscious mind desperately wants something different. Jung observed this pattern in thousands of patients, and what he found was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Empaths who were criticized as children unconsciously seek critical partners. Empaths who were neglected seek neglectful people. Empaths who had to earn love through performance seek partners who withhold approval. It's not that you consciously choose cruelty. It's that cruelty feels familiar, and the unconscious mind always chooses familiar over healthy because familiar equals survival, even when familiar equals suffering. This is why you've probably looked back at the beginning of the relationship and seen red flags that you ignored, boundary violations you explained away, moments of cruelty that you rationalized as stress or misunderstanding. Your conscious mind was sending you warnings, but your unconscious mind was running a different program. This person feels right, your unconscious whispered, and what it meant was, this person feels like the original wound, and maybe this time I can heal it. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. You can't heal your past by choosing people who recreate your past. You can only heal your past by becoming conscious of the pattern and making different choices. The person who treated you badly wasn't wrong for you because of bad timing or poor communication or incompatibility. They were wrong for you because they were cast by your unconscious mind to play the role of the unavailable parent, the critical authority figure, the rejecting caregiver. They weren't supposed to love you well. They were supposed to show you where you still haven't learned to love yourself well. Every moment they dismissed you was a moment you'd been dismissing your own needs. Every time they invalidated your feelings was reflecting how you've invalidated your own emotions to keep the peace. Jung called this the shadow bargain. You trade your authentic needs for the illusion of connection. You sacrifice your truth for the fantasy of being chosen. You abandon yourself repeatedly in the hope that your self-abandonment will finally earn you the love you deserved all along. But the cruel mathematics of this bargain never work out in your favor. The more you abandon yourself, the more you attract people who will abandon you. The more you tolerate mistreatment, the more the universe sends people who will mistreat you, not as punishment but as instruction. Wake up. Your soul is screaming through these painful relationships. Wake up and see where you've been betraying yourself. The breaking point comes when you finally recognize the pattern, when you see with devastating clarity that every person who treated you badly was showing you the same wound from a different angle. And in that recognition, something shifts. You stop asking, why did they treat me this way? And start asking, what part of me has been accepting this treatment? What belief about my worth has been allowing this pattern to repeat? Where did I learn that my love has to be earned through suffering? If you're recognizing yourself in this pattern, if you can see now how you've been unconsciously choosing people who hurt you, share in the comments just one word: awakening. Sometimes acknowledging the pattern is the first step toward breaking it. Jung discovered that when an empath finally recognizes these patterns, something profound and terrifying happens. He called it ego death, and for empaths, this death is particularly excruciating because it requires the destruction of an identity you've built your entire life around. You've been the understanding one, the compassionate one, the person who always sees the best in people, the one who holds space for everyone's darkness. These qualities have become your identity, and more than that, they've become your strategy for earning love. If I can just be patient enough, understanding enough, loving enough, then I'll finally be chosen. Then I'll finally be enough. But Jung found that this identity, which he termed the empathic martyr, is actually a defense mechanism masquerading as a virtue. You learned early in life that your needs made people uncomfortable, that your emotions were burdensome, that your pain was too much. So you developed a strategy. You made yourself endlessly available to others' pain while becoming completely unavailable to your own. You learned to find your value in how much you could give, how much you could tolerate, how much suffering you could absorb without breaking. And this strategy worked for a while. It earned you connection, approval, the feeling of being needed. But then you met someone who showed you the fatal flaw in this strategy. You gave them everything: your time, your energy, your emotional labor, your unconditional acceptance, and they took it all without gratitude, without reciprocity, without even basic respect. They treated your boundless love like it was worthless, like you were worthless. And in that devastating moment, your entire identity collapsed. If being endlessly giving doesn't make me lovable, then who am I? If my capacity to love isn't enough, then what is? Jung would tell you that this collapse, as painful as it is absolutely necessary for your evolution. The empathic martyr had to die because that identity was keeping you trapped in relationships where your worth was contingent on your usefulness. You weren't being loved for who you are. You were being used for what you could provide. The person who treated you badly didn't shatter you out of cruelty alone. They shattered you because your soul needed that identity to break so a truer self could emerge. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth, and he observed that most people abort this transformation because the death phase is unbearable. You feel like you're losing yourself, and in a sense, you are. You're losing the false self that believed love had to be earned through self-sacrifice. You're losing the persona that found safety in being needed rather than being valued. You're losing the strategy that made you indispensable but never cherished. These losses feel like dying, because psychologically, they are. But Jung discovered something extraordinary about people who have the courage to stay with this death, rather than rushing to rebuild the old self or numb the pain with new relationships, new distractions, new martyrdom. He found that on the other side of this death, a new self emerges, what he called the individuated empath. This version of you still possesses all your empathic gifts, your ability to feel deeply, to see souls, to hold complexity. But now you have something you never had before: boundaries that honor your worth, discernment about who deserves access to your gifts, and most importantly, a relationship with yourself that's so nourishing that external validation becomes optional rather than essential. The person who treated you badly was never meant to be your destination. They were meant to be the catalyst that destroyed the version of you that was willing to accept cruelty in exchange for crumbs of connection. That version had to die, and her death, though agonizing, is creating space for a woman who knows her worth isn't measured by how much she can give, but by the simple fact that she exists. Jung made an observation that explains why you can't simply move on from someone who treated you badly, why they still occupy space in your mind months or even years later, why you can feel them thinking about you across distances and time. He discovered that empaths form what he called energetic cords, invisible but psychologically real connections that link your emotional body to the people you've loved deeply. These aren't metaphors or spiritual fantasies. Jung believed these were actual psychological structures that exist in the collective unconscious, threads of connection that remain active long after the physical relationship ends. When you love someone as an empath, you don't just connect to their personality or behavior. You connect to their soul. You merge with their emotional frequency. Your nervous system learns to resonate with theirs. This is why you could sense their moods before they walked in the room, why you knew when something was wrong even when they said everything was fine, why you felt their pain as if it were your own. Jung found that this level of connection creates neurological and energetic pathways that don't simply disappear when the person leaves. The cords remain, transmitting emotional information both ways, which is why you still feel them and why, on some unconscious level, they still feel you. This is why certain songs trigger visceral reactions in your body, why you wake at 3 in the morning with emotions that don't feel like your own, why you have inexplicable knowing about what they're experiencing even though you haven't spoken in months. Jung called this psychic bleeding, where the boundaries between your emotional experience and theirs remain permeable despite physical separation. You're still energetically entangled with someone who may have completely moved on in their external life, and this creates a unique type of suffering that people who aren't empathic simply cannot comprehend. Most advice about moving on assumes that no contact and distraction will eventually dissolve the attachment, but Jung knew that for empaths, these cords don't dissolve through avoidance. They transform through conscious integration. You have to acknowledge the cord, honor what it represents, feel gratitude for the connection while consciously reclaiming the energy you've been sending through it. This isn't about forgetting them or pretending they didn't matter. This is about retrieving the parts of yourself that you unconsciously gave away, the pieces of your soul that you projected onto someone who couldn't hold them. Jung developed a practice he rarely discussed publicly, something he called cord consciousness. He would have empaths sit in stillness and visualize the energetic cord connecting them to the person who hurt them, not to cut it violently, which only creates psychic wounding, but to transform it, to let it shift from a thick rope draining your life force into a thin golden thread that honors the soul connection while no longer binding you to their emotional reality, to bless their journey while releasing your attachment to being part of that journey, to acknowledge that you can love someone eternally in the realm of souls while accepting that your human paths are not meant to intertwine. Jung found that empaths who master this practice experience something remarkable. They maintain their empathic gifts and their capacity for profound connection, but they develop what he called sovereign boundaries. They can feel deeply without being destabilized by what they feel. They can sense others' emotions without taking responsibility for managing them. They can love without losing themselves in who they love. The cord taught you something essential about your empathic system. You have the capacity to connect at soul depth, but that capacity becomes self-destructive when you offer it to people who aren't conscious enough to receive it without exploiting it. And if right now you're feeling those cords still pulling at your heart, still keeping you tied to someone who hurt you, maybe it's time to begin the gentle work of reclaiming yourself. There's a way through this that honors both the love and the letting go, and I'll share more about that path in just a moment. Jung discovered that the most profound gift hidden within the pain of being mistreated as an empath is what he called psychological alchemy, the transformation of suffering into wisdom, of woundedness into wholeness, of naive love into conscious love. He found that empaths who fully experience the devastation of being treated cruelly despite offering pure love undergo a metamorphosis that most people never achieve. You don't just heal from what happened. You become fundamentally different because of what happened. The alchemy begins when you stop trying to make sense of their cruelty and start exploring what the cruelty revealed about your relationship with yourself. Jung observed that every external relationship is a mirror of your internal relationship with yourself. The person who dismissed your needs was showing you how you've been dismissing your own needs. The person who invalidated your emotions was reflecting how you've invalidated your own feelings to avoid conflict. The person who treated your love as worthless was mirroring the part of you that's never fully claimed your worth. This realization is devastating because it requires you to stop being the victim and start being the author of your life. It's easier to blame them for their cruelty than to ask yourself why you accepted it. It's easier to focus on their flaws than to examine where you abandoned your standards. It's easier to replay their mistreatment than to investigate the belief system that made their mistreatment feel tolerable. But Jung knew that true transformation requires brutal self-honesty, the willingness to see how you've been complicit in your own suffering, not because you deserved it, but because you hadn't yet learned to protect yourself from it. The alchemical process Jung described has distinct stages. First comes the nigredo, the blackening, where everything you believed about love and yourself dissolves into chaos and grief. You can't make the old strategies work anymore, but you don't yet know what new approach to take. This is the dark night of the empathic soul, and most people get stuck here, cycling between hope and despair, wanting to move forward but terrified of letting go. Jung understood that this darkness serves a purpose. It strips away every illusion about love that no longer serves you, every fantasy about fixing broken people, every belief that your worth comes from your capacity to endure suffering. Then comes the albedo, the whitening, where clarity begins to emerge from the chaos. You start to see the patterns you've been repeating. You recognize the unconscious programs that have been running your relationship choices. You understand that your empathic gifts are sacred when they're offered from sovereignty rather than from need. You realize that the person who hurt you was never capable of receiving what you offered, not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready. This stage brings relief mixed with grief. Relief at finally understanding the truth and grief at all the time you lost trying to make impossible love possible. Finally comes the rubedo, the reddening, where integration happens. You emerge with your empathic gifts intact but transformed. You can still feel deeply, but you're no longer destabilized by intensity. You can still see people's souls, but you're no longer responsible for healing them. You can still offer profound love, but only to people who can reciprocate at your level. You've learned the difference between unconditional love and unconditional tolerance. You've discovered that real love requires boundaries, discernment, reciprocity. You've become an empath who loves from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion, from wisdom rather than wounding. Jung called this the sacred transformation, and he believed it was one of the most valuable psychological achievements a human could attain. The person who treated you badly gave you an unwitting gift. They showed you exactly where you still needed to grow. They forced you to develop the sovereignty your soul was longing for. They initiated you into a deeper, wiser, more boundaried way of loving. The alchemy is complete when you can look back at the pain with gratitude, not for the cruelty, but for what the cruelty forced you to become. Jung spent his final years reflecting on what he called the individuated empath, and what he found was this: the empaths who emerge from the fire of mistreatment carrying wisdom rather than bitterness, boundaries rather than walls, self-love rather than martyrdom. These are the people who transform not just their own lives, but the collective consciousness around what love can become. You weren't randomly chosen for this painful initiation. Your soul specifically selected this experience because you have the capacity to transform suffering into evolutionary consciousness, and the world desperately needs people who know how to love wisely. The conscious empath Jung described possesses qualities that are extraordinarily rare. You maintain your gift of deep feeling, but now you're discerning about who receives access to that gift. You can still sense people's wounds, but you no longer take responsibility for healing wounds that aren't yours to heal. You still have profound capacity for empathy, but you've learned to extend that empathy to yourself first. You've discovered that the most radical act an empath can perform is refusing to abandon herself to maintain connection with people who don't value what she offers. Jung observed that conscious empaths develop what he called tempered radiance. Your light still shines, but it's no longer unprotected. You've learned to be warm without being consumed, open without being invaded, loving without being depleted. You've built an inner sanctuary where your worth isn't contingent on being needed, where your value isn't measured by how much you can give, where your love is recognized as the sacred gift it is. And from this sanctuary, you offer yourself to the world, not as a martyr but as a sovereign being who knows the difference between compassion and codependency, between understanding and enabling, between love and self-betrayal. The person who treated you badly taught you something that no amount of healthy love could have taught you. They showed you what happens when you offer your deepest gifts to people who can't cherish them. They revealed the price of loving without boundaries, of giving without reciprocity, of staying when every instinct was screaming for you to leave. They forced you to choose between the familiar pain of being mistreated and the unfamiliar courage of honoring your worth. And by choosing yourself, by finally walking away, by refusing to accept cruelty as the price of connection, you initiated your transformation into a woman who will never settle for that treatment again. Jung would want you to know that every tear you cried was watering the ground for this new self to grow. Every night you spent questioning your worth was actually your psyche, dismantling old programming about lovability. Every moment you felt abandoned was teaching you to stop abandoning yourself. The pain had purpose. The breaking served your becoming. The impossible situation was preparing you for conscious partnership with someone who can actually meet you at the depth where your real self lives. If this journey through Jung's wisdom about empaths and mistreatment has helped you see your experience through a new lens? I'd be deeply honored if you'd share what you've learned about yourself in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another empath needs to hear to keep going. What did this person's cruelty teach you about your own worth? What boundaries are you finally ready to establish? What old beliefs about love are you ready to release? And if you're feeling that it's time to go deeper, to truly transform this pain into power and wisdom, I want you to know that I've created something specifically for empaths on this journey. It's in the first pinned comment. Our ebook, Your Pain Wasn't in Vain, a Jungian guide to transforming impossible love into self-knowledge and inner strength. This guide will walk you through a 30-day process of reclaiming yourself, understanding the deeper patterns at play, and building the sovereign boundaries that will protect your empathic gifts going forward. I leave it there, if you feel it might support you in this moment. Please subscribe to continue exploring these depths of human consciousness with me, and share this with another empath who needs to know that their capacity to feel everything is their superpower, not their flaw. Thank you for trusting me with this sacred time, for having the courage to feel deeply in a world that often demands numbness, and for being willing to transform your pain into the wisdom that will guide you home to yourself. Your empathic heart isn't broken. It's breaking open into its truest, most sovereign expression. Until we meet again in the next exploration of what it means to love consciously and live authentically.